Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today during our first meetup in 2023. Happy New Year, by the way. May this new year bring you a lot of happiness, good health, and a success for sure. So this is just a brief introduction about RLD's Paris. So RLD's Paris is a local chapter of a worldwide organization, RLD's Global. As you can see, RLD's chapters have been active across different regions, and the number of chapters is always growing. So LED's Paris aims to dedicate more support towards improving gender diversity in the R community and to support all our users all over the world. So because I know today you have like people joining us from different corners of the world. The chapter was founded in 2016 and it's currently running by me. So my name is Mona Bilaid and I'm business intelligence consultant and prime analytics. I'm passionate about the use of R and volunteering. So this is where you can find RLD's Paris on social media, so on Twitter, or you can also join our Meetup group. This is where you'll be notified about our upcoming events. You can also find us on GitHub. So you have also GitHub organization. So this is where all the materials of the previous meetups are available. And this is where you are going to store also the materials of our future meetups. And you can also follow us, join us, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is where you share the recording videos of our previous events. You are also available on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can also join our WhatsApp group. So this is where you can get closely in touch with the RLD's Paris community members through discussions, and this is where you can learn more about each other and improve your R skills. You can maybe share in this group about projects you are working on using R. So please don't hesitate to join, add, and to introduce yourself there. So I will make sure to share with you the links in the chat in a bit, okay? Yeah, what about giving an overview of our upcoming virtual meetups? So you have a session on January 27, and you made a collaboration with other communities, RLD's Cologne, PyLD's Tunis, and PyLD's Munich, and you will organize a new session about automating your project with the GitHub Actions and Quarto. So you learn how you can easily combine Python and R with Quarto, so to communicate your results. So this meetup might be of interest to the R and Python communities. You can scan right now the QR code and get access to the meetup page for more details and for registration. You will also have a friends session on February 9th. So this will be about how to program in R without coding, okay? For French people, comment programmer sur R avec la voix. So this will be in collaboration with RLD Strasbourg. You have also another session on February 17, and this will be about AutoML using HGO. Welcome to join us. Yeah, what about today's meetup? So this meetup will serve as an overview of the difference between RMarkdown and Quarto. So we'll learn about the features of Quarto and if you need really maybe to make the switch from RMarkdown to Quarto. Yeah, so you are so pleased to be hosting Ted Laderas today. So Ted is a bioinformatics trainer at DNA Nexus and a data science mentor for POSIT Academy. Using evidence-based pedagogy, so he empowers bioinformatics to utilize the cloud to work with very large genomic data sets. So he's passionate about collaboration, training, and team science. And he believes that research and analysis should not be lonely, and building communities of practice in science and research so that are safe and inclusive are the key to doing better, more robust service. And I can't agree more. I'm sure we'll learn a lot from here today. So last thing before you start, if you have any question, please don't hesitate to leave your question in the chat box. I will let Ted know about them. And later, when we be leaving Zoom, we will be asked if you would like to participate in a short survey. So please don't hesitate to fill out the short feedback form. Last thing, so in our ladies part, you have a code of conduct. So please let's make this place a friendly community and friendly space for everyone. Thank you so much for your attention, and Ted, the screen is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mona. Okay, let me share my screen. And, thank you for inviting me. And it's wonderful to see there's some Portlanders on the call too, or our Portland, our user group people. Before we get started, I would just like to invite everyone. We also do events. They tend to be very informal. A lot of the times it's all about knowledge sharing, and we want to make sure that kind of everyone is able to kind of learn and use R. So I'm going to put the link to the user group in the chat. So you are all welcome to any of our events. And yeah, so just in the spirit of collaboration. Okay, so today's topic is, talking, as Mona mentioned, so it's about Quarto versus RMarkdown. And a lot of the times, it took me a long time to decide that the switch was worth making. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in chat. I do training for a living, so I really like to kind of dynamically answer questions as they come up. Okay, so let's just talk about what we're going to be talking about. So we are going to be talking about kind of what Quarto is, and then, answering the question, should you really switch? This is a question that's personal to everyone, but I usually find that there's some sort of killer application that kind of motivates you. So I'm going to show you some of the cool features of Quarto. And then we'll talk a little bit about converting your previous RMarkdown documents into kind of a Quarto site. The other cool thing about Quarto is it can directly convert Jupyter notebooks, and I'll show you a little bit about that. And then happy, if there's any time afterwards, happy to kind of answer any questions that come up. And thank you everyone for letting me know, letting us know your background with RMarkdown and Quarto. That always helps me when I talk. And thank you for posting the link to the slideshow, Sean. Okay. So Mona already mentioned most of this to me about me. So my main job is right here. So I'm basically a bioinformatics trainer at DNA Nexus. I do a lot of work with cloud computing and kind of getting people on the cloud. I think it's one of these things, there's a lot of moving parts, and it's actually really fun to kind of see people kind of progress with that. I need to change this because it's now Posit Academy, but I am a data science mentor for Posit Academy. And if you're interested in that program, I'm happy to talk some more, and I can connect you with the people at Posit if you're interested. Either as I think they're still looking for data science mentors. Unfortunately, still in the US right now, they're still trying to figure out, how to work with data science mentors for Europe and beyond. So I am, my qualifications, I've used R for quite a while, and I'm both certified by both RStudio and the Carpentries as a certified instructor. Here is a link. These are just some of my social media. And then if you go to my Twitter page, there's also a link to my Mastodon page. And this is my website where I try to kind of keep updated with all of my news and everything. Yeah, so the question is, did I make the slides with JS Reveal? So that's a great question. We'll get to that. The Reveal JS support in Quarto is actually very slick. So we'll talk more about that. So thanks for asking that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what Quarto is. So if you go to the website quarto.org, they call it a reproducible publishing system based on Pandoc. So that's, if you're not familiar with what any of these terms, that's okay. The main idea with Quarto, much like RMarkdown, is that you write everything in a single format, which is Quarto format, which is very similar to RMarkdown. And then you can basically do what's called a render, and you can make it into many different kinds of outputs. The cool thing is that, especially they've really kind of streamlined getting Quarto documents up on a website. So there's kind of multiple ways to get to do that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But especially publication worthy websites, doing things like references and everything, and then books and dashboards. So what I will say about Quarto, right before we get started with anything else, is that it replicates a lot of things in RMarkdown. But if you are familiar with RMarkdown, a lot of these kind of internal formats are not kind of native to RMarkdown. Someone has written an extension or a package for that to enable that. So Quarto tries to kind of bring everything into kind of the same umbrella, or basically into kind of, so it also kind of standardizes a lot of the outputs, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So instead of RMarkdown, so RMarkdown has the .rmd files. So the equivalent for Quarto is the QMD file, so short for Quarto Markdown. And a lot of the times you can actually just change the extension of your RMarkdown file to QMD, and you will get very far in switching over to Quarto. We'll talk more about making the switch in a little bit, but when you're just kind of getting started, just making that simple switch in file extension, will kind of get you kind of started with getting things. The other main difference of Quarto is that we all love RMarkdown, but RMarkdown is very tied into the RStudio development environment. And they wanted to make Quarto more kind of generalizable to a lot of people in a lot of different languages. So this is kind of the goal of a lot of kind of POSIT products. If you attended RStudio Conf, either online or in person, you've learned that they also have Shiny for Python. So their scope has kind of expanded beyond R. But no worries, just before I go any further, Hadley has said he's not going to learn Python. The R support is going to still be there. They've just kind of expanded their support. Not only is RStudio supported, but also VS Code, which is very popular. Jupyter Lab is supported. So there is basically kind of support in a lot of different kind of editors and IDEs. And yes, thank you for posting that those links, Mona. But don't worry. So if you're worried about knitting, the equivalent of Quarto is render. And you can still do that within RStudio. I'll show you a couple of those things. But the other thing about Quarto is that it is a command line tool. And so if you are familiar with command line, you can basically knit or render a document using Quarto render and then the name of your document. So this is kind of a big change. If you were familiar with RMarkdown, you know that it supports R and Python. But in addition, Quarto is supporting Julia and Observable. I think there was some Julia support in RMarkdown before, but all of this is very tightly integrated. So this is I just want to make a side tour, because you might wonder, how do you have multiple languages in the same document, and how do they see the data? How do you pass data to and from? So this is a very cool link, basically a bit of code from Bob Rudis. If you follow him on Twitter, his handle is Harbormaster, HBRMSTR, I think. But I just want to take a quick detour and kind of show you like how the cross-language support works. So here he's been very clear about what is in Python and what is in R. So what he's doing is he is using this package called Arrow, which uses Apache Arrow. And Apache Arrow is one of these new things that, and if there's questions about Arrow, I can kind of answer basic questions about it, but it lets you basically work with very large data files. And the cool thing is that, you can see that this is a little bit of Python code, and we are reading in the CSV into what's called an Arrow data set called MTA here. I'm going to make my screen a little bigger. Yeah, thank you. Okay, is that better? Okay, so you can see this is a method from this Arrow package. And then we're going to read this very large data set into this object called MTA. So the way you work with Python objects is through a package called Reticulate. And if you load in the Arrow package in dplyr, you can access that MTA object in Python with this $. So in Reticulate, the object is always py. So the object that we need to access within py is called MTA, because we created that here. And you can see this is just dplyr code. And what is happening is that you are actually processing this Arrow data set with dplyr. And it's very cool because, you can see that the data came from Python, but you can work with it as if it's in R. So Arrow is a very kind of, it's a very powerful tool for kind of working with this extremely large data. And Quarto has made it very, very learnable to actually, work with both Python and R. If you are familiar with Observable, which is kind of the new generation of D3, which is a JavaScript visualization library, you can actually pass on that. You can pass on that object into Observable using this OJS_define object, and then you can work with that object within Observable. There's a lot of code here, just because there's a lot of, I think Bob basically imported all of the functions, but it's very cool in terms of everything. Yeah. Yeah. Are people interested in our joining forces with R and Python? I know this is an R meetup. Okay. So it's the learning curve for doing that kind of exchange is a little, there's a little bit to learn, but once you kind of learn that, the exchange is extremely powerful. And you can imagine that someone could be doing their processing in pandas, and you can basically save that as an Arrow data set and then start working with it directly in R. So it's very cool. If you are familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, so they are basically the cross compatibility is built into Quarto, And if you have a notebook with all of your outputs, there's one command to change it to that relevant QMD file. So it's Quarto convert, and then the name of your notebook. So this will create a QMD file that's also called notebook. You can change this in the various options. But so Julia, Julia Stewart Lowndes and Mina Sedenkaya Rendell, if you attended our studio conf, they showed that basically they were working with our National Space Agency, NASA, and they were able to basically quickly publish their notebooks online. So this is one of those things I think it's going to make Quarto very popular, and as the ability to kind of share things. Oh yeah, so the new pipe operator. I don't know if I use them in this talk, but yeah. Okay, so one thing to know about Quarto is that if you're familiar with RMarkdown, it basically will try to recompute everything from scratch. But by default, with Quarto, the code output is not recomputed. You can actually force a recompute when you do a Quarto render if you give this -- execute option here. And also within your YAML front matter, you can also change whether the output is being frozen here. So this might be good for when you've got a very large data set and you don't want to recompute a bunch of things. Saving the fact that Quarto saves its output can be very helpful. Okay, so one of the big differences is that if you're familiar with RMarkdown, is that you often put a lot of your display options within the code chunk, within that R designator at the beginning. If that's not clear, I'll talk about it. But a lot of this has been moved into the code chunk, and I'll show you what that means. So here, this is an RMarkdown code chunk. So this is a setup chunk. We've named it setup. And here, we don't want the actual code to be included. We just want to show the output. Yeah, thanks for pointing out about the new pipe operator. So let's see what that looks like in Quarto. So we have moved everything like that was in this little R, the R in curly brackets. And we designate the options here as what's called a hash pipe. So this is a hash symbol followed by a pipe symbol, and then we can put our options. If you were familiar with RMarkdown, you might realize that a lot of these options, depending on how you needed to format each of the code chunks, this little R here could get very large, like with lots of options. So this is kind of one nice thing about Quarto. So this setup this will still work in Quarto. But I'll show you a trick for basically converting your Quarto or your RMarkdown documents to this format in a little bit. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, hash pipe. If you're a 90s kid like me, you'll think about Weezer every time you say hash pipe. Okay, so let's talk about the differences with Quarto. So what I will say is a lot of it, and this, I'm not putting down RMarkdown, but I think part of the reason why it was hard to use and translate into many different formats was that you had to know what YAML to put there and what YAML belongs with which kind of format. So that standardization actually saves a lot of headaches. And this is not a slight against RMarkdown. It's just kind of the way that, RMarkdown grew with a lot of extensions. So a lot of the things that people use every day have been brought into kind of Quarto. You can still write extensions for Quarto as well. Like I mentioned before, it's the actual rendering is decoupled from RStudio. And this is one of the things that I really liked, was that it's there's more consistent presentation across formats. For things like tab panels, like you could render a HTML document, like a web page, and it might be slightly different than, with a with like a slide set. So a lot of that HTML rendering is very consistent across all of the formats. This to me was the killer application for me, which was code highlighting, and I'll show you an example of that. I'm very into like teaching and education, and anything I can do to kind of make things more clear for students, I try to use. So Yue, the godfather of RMarkdown, he's also on the Quarto team. But these are his thoughts. So should you switch to Quarto? Not necessarily. If you find RMarkdown meets your needs, you can definitely stay there. So there is going to be quite a bit of RMarkdown support. I will say there might be some Quarto specific features. That's the main reason to start thinking about switching to Quarto. So like he says, it's not imperative to switch. So I'm now going to show you some of the, in terms of the HTML rendering, things that are very nice, especially doing layouts, tab panels, and code highlighting, and talk a little bit about output freezing. Okay, so when you actually render a Quarto document, what happens is that there is this _freeze directory that's created in your project that has all of the output. So like, the graphics and the tables, all of that basically stays in that freeze directory. So you can, we'll talk more about this _quarto.yml file, but you can set this as an option within your project to have code freezing enabled. It's enabled by default, but sometimes I think it's important to be explicit about what is enabled within your project. Yes, so the question is freeze like cache? Yes, it's pretty much identical to cache. It's set up a little differently because of all of the different language support. So what is my reflection on switching to Quarto and why? Okay, that's part of why I'm kind of talking today. I'm kind of showing you the applications that really made it worth switching for me. So again, like, making the switch is a personal decision. If you don't have time, I guess my message to you is that don't feel like you're missing out. RMarkdown can still do a lot of things that Quarto does. I'm just trying to highlight kind of the differences that Quarto basically kind of brings. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about freezing results. Oh, okay. Is everyone still seeing the cross-language screen?
It's okay for me. No.
Okay.
For us.
Okay. So which one should I open? Quarto document or presentation? So I'll show you in a second. Kind of that kind of the differences between them. It's actually like with the Reveal.js presentation and the HTML document, like I said, like the rendering is very similar. So you could actually literally switch like the output, and you could do like an HTML page instead. Okay. So like I mentioned, so when you're working on the command line, you use this Quarto render function. So if we wanted to basically render everything in our current project directory, we could use this Quarto render and then the dot. And then, but if you want to force like recomputing, you can use this -- execute. Yes, could someone please share the slide link, please? I'd really appreciate that. And the link is also at the bottom here, if you can see that. So here's an example of the layouts. I will say that this is kind of, it took a little time for me to kind of wrap my head around this kind of notation because it is a little different. But you can see it starts out with these three colons here, and or 4 colons here, and it ends with 4 colons. So this is Quarto's kind of equivalent of defining, you know, like if you're familiar with HTML, a div element, which is a very kind of general formatting element. But you see that we gave this a property called dot columns here, and then within that we can define our different columns here with 3 dots, and then everything within these 3 dots is going to be within this column. And there are a lot of options that we can set within a column. So we can change the width, we can change the graphic positioning. It's a lot more kind of customizable in terms of the formatting. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like when it gets rendered. So you can see that now we've got 2 columns in our document. So and like what I will say is this is a lot less work than using div tags if you've used div tags in your RMarkdown. So this is this kind of notation takes a little bit of time to learn, but it is very worth learning because you get to be much more exact in terms of your placement and everything. And thank you, Martine, for sharing the link. Okay, so let's talk about tab sets. This is something that I use a lot because it allows you to not only kind of show your code, but it also lets you show your output kind of in a single location. So, oops. So I'm going to show you another cool feature of Quarto is that you can jump to slides over here. Just a second. Okay, so this is what's called a tab set here, and it has this dot panel dash tab set, and it is defined with these three colons. And these everything that's denoted by a three hashes within that is going to be rendered as a separate tab. So what we expect to see is that there's going to be a tab that looks like this that is called code. And then there'll be, I didn't show the ggplot code here, but there'll be also a tab that shows a figure. And I misspelled ggplot. Apologies. Okay, so, and like I said, this is one of those things I really love for teaching, is that you can show people code, and then you can also show people the output. And this works well not only within Reveal.js. So this is all written with the Reveal.js format, but this will also apply to HTML. Okay, so the question is our Markdown had tabs, but seemed to have more options in the format of tabs, regular tabs, pills, fade, etc. Yes, so I didn't really have time to kind of show how deep this gets, but a lot of those options are also available in Quarto. I think, you know, a lot of the tab set stuff, I mean, I think Garrick was the one who kind of introduced a lot of that. So I think a lot of his code basically got integrated into Quarto as well. Okay, so like I said, I'm an educator, and this is one of the things that really made me decide to switch to Quarto. So I was a teaching assistant for um, the Building Tidy Tools workshop at our Studio Conf this year or last year, and both Emma Rand and Ian Little were teaching that, and they used this. And I was just like, this is such a great teaching tool. So I'll show you what this looks like, and then we'll talk about the format in a second. So the reason why I do like this code highlighting is that it allows you to kind of step through code. So you can see I've highlighted this first line here called data penguins. And then also I can highlight the next line and then the final line. So, I really love this because, I'm very much about kind of managing, people's cognitive load, and, any tools that I have like this to help people kind of focus on what I want them to focus on is very helpful. So how did I do that? So I had another hash pipeline. And if you use this code underscore line numbers, and then there's this kind of funny notation, but you can see I wanted to highlight the third line. And then we separate that with the pipe here. And then I wanted to highlight lines 4 to 6, and then finally end on line 7. So the numbering begins after all of this stuff. So this is considered line 1. And then, so we want, so line 3, in this case would be this line here, data penguins. So the question is, what I like from the Jargon extension is highlighting the code that you point at. So I don't know the answer to that. That's a great question. So I'll follow up on that. So hopefully that gave you a taste of, kind of the new things in Quarto. So I just want to kind of end with talking a little bit about how you can move to Quarto from your RMD documents. So this is not, this is just in terms of my experience. This is what I found to be the most useful kind of checklist to get started. The first is to start a Quarto project. Don't try to kind of set up a Quarto project by hand. That's why this exists. It's in RStudio. It's also an option in VS Code, and I think that the Jupyter Lab as well. So for your documents, so what is the difference between a Quarto project and a regular project from RStudio? So this is a great question. So a Quarto project will work outside of RStudio. Basically, you can open it up in RStudio, but again, it's kind of set up so you can use it across multiple development environments. So it will also play nicely with VS Code if you have the extension. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so once you do that, the first change is to change. You'll know, if you're familiar with RMarkdown, you'll know that there is this output parameter in the front matter. You need to change output to format. And once you do that, a lot of the things will fall in place. But there's kind of this additional step, and I'll show you this in a second. There's a function in knitr called convert_chunk header, and I'll show you what that does. It'll basically take your RMD file and output a QMD file. So you can once you do that, you render your files, and then for websites, you can edit your Quarto. We'll talk a little bit about this, your _Quarto.yml file if necessary. Okay, so in RStudio, and this is an R specific meetup, so everything I'm showing you from now on is going to be R specific. So if you go, you need to have the latest version of RStudio and the latest version, a more up-to-date version of R. So under the file menu, you can create a new Quarto project. So that you'll, when you create a project within a new directory, you'll see that there are all of these options here so that you can create a Quarto project, website, blog, and book. This is just kind of the beginning. So like I said, so, when you convert your RMarkdown documents, you're going to change that output into format. So let's make that explicit. So this is an old set. This is the old version of the slides that were written in Jargon. And so I want to change this over into Quarto. So I need to change that into the format is called reveal.js instead of Jargon Moonreader here. So and then the options are a little different. But I think they're very nice. So you can see here, this is how I added my header to my slides. And this is how I kind of did the theming. I'm not that creative in terms of colors and everything. So what are those different formats? So this is kind of a table that lets you kind of convert things. So if you rendered an HTML document before, you will change that to format HTML. A PDF document becomes PDF. So Jargon and reveal.js, they're very similar. The main thing is with Jargon, you don't with reveal.js, you don't have to put those slide breaks, those 3 dashes between the slides. The reveal.js interpreter is very smart. And I'll show. I'm happy to kind of show you what this presentation looks like. If there's any questions about that. So Distill, there is like a whole article about like the Quarto project. Okay, is there a presentation mode in Quarto reveal.js like in Jargon? Yes. So I'm not familiar with all of the features, but you can see there's this little hamburger icon down here. And you can actually modify, there's a lot of tools here, like you can see the speaker view, slide overview, and then, export to PDF and things like that. Okay, so we talked about converting the HTML, or the YAML. So let's talk about like building our QMD files. So if we have an RMarkdown file that we've just modified and it's called filename.rmd, we can use this function called knitr convert chunk header. So I'll show you what that does in a little bit, but this will output basically a QMD file. So you can do this conversion directly, but I'll show you what this does. It actually saves a lot of time when you're kind of converting your Quarto chunks. So this is an original code chunk. This is that example I showed you before. And then when you run that through that convert chunk option, it will be the code chunk will be reformatted, so it will have that kind of hash pipe format. Okay, I'm talking a lot. Any other questions that are coming up? Okay. So how do you render in RStudio? So there is in RStudio itself, there is instead of a knit button, there is a render button. And there's also this function called Quarto render. Ignore this backtick here, that's a mistake. I will fix that. But this will let you basically render your entire project. On the command line, the equivalent is Quarto, and then you follow that with render, and then the name of your file. So I wish I had more time to talk about kind of setting up your the Quarto .yaml. But this is a file. If you have a lot of options, like for example, if you're building a website, it's very helpful. And you create a Quarto project as a Quarto website, you'll have this file that's created. This is very nice because you can put a lot of front matter in here that's kind of that applies to all of your documents within your Quarto project. So here you can see that we have a project of type website. And so this is yeah. I'll think about that one, Jonathan. I'll get to that in just a second. But here we're kind of building a. Yep. Thank you, Mona. So thank you. So here we've got our website, and then we've got basically, this is the title of the website and the description. And yes, so Miguel's question, I can answer that one easily. Yes, you can put it on RPubs. There's an option in Quarto Publish. The new site is quarto.pub, but you can still use RPubs. Here, basically, this is how you specify like the menu. How does one render Quarto documents on a loop? Let's get to that in just a second. But I just wanted to show you, this is how you include documents into your website. So this is going to create a menu here, and it's going to create, and these are all of the files that we want to be rendered. And you can see I have a Python, a Jupyter notebook here as well. So if you include that file name, it will render. Okay, so like I said, you can mix and match formats. So this is kind of a version of my website. When I converted from Distill to Quarto, it was actually fairly painless. There was a little bit that I had to learn, but and so you can see that these are all of the RMD. So I have an RMD file here. I've got a QMD file here, and then I've got a Jupyter notebook here. So Dan, can you just explain what you mean by rendering on a loop? And you can just put that in chat and we can kind of keep on talking. So this is the other reason why I really like Quarto, is that it's set up to publish to a lot of different services. So GitHub pages, you will need to kind of enable a menu option in your GitHub repository, but once you do that, it's very quick to do to get your content onto GitHub as a GitHub page. Like I mentioned, the new kind of site instead of RPubs is quarto.pub, so there is a publish command for that. This is, I wish this existed in the time I spent a lot of time kind of publishing, setting up Netlify. So this is a very nice, Netlify is a very nice kind of web service provider, and you can directly publish to it. A lot of the times I run things off of Netlify because it's free for the first 250,000 views per month, and I'm never going to go over that. So a lot of my websites go in Netlify. And then there's also RStudio Connect. So you need to set up things, and you can do a Quarto Publish Connect. So let's wrap things up. So Quarto supports multiple languages and integrated development environments. Quarto standardizes a lot of outputs. It does a better job of one document, many outputs. So like, yes. So, okay. So yeah. So Dan's kind of elaborating here. Let me finish this and then we'll get to this question. But like, the main example I have is that Jerrigan and Jerrigan was not kind of easily compatible with, you know, like if you wanted to switch it to an HTML document from Jargon, it wasn't easy. So a lot of that has been kind of changed. And then there's a lot of publishing features, which I haven't talked about, but they're very cool. You can do references and, you know, have figure references and things like that. Handles that automatically. Okay, so Dan's question is about, it sounds like really kind of parameterized RMarkdown. So if you have basically an RMarkdown report, you can actually put in parameters, specify parameters to an RMarkdown report. So if you had 10 different cost center owners and you wanted to generate a report for each of those, you can actually change the parameters for those reports. So you can do something very similar in Quarto. Anything that you can do in parameterized Markdown, you can also do in parameterized Quarto. Does that answer your question? And I just want to kind of conclude. These are a great, this was a great workshop by my buddy Andrew Bray at Reed College. So he did a workshop like going from RMD to Quarto. This goes into much more detail. If you're interested in the repository for this talk, and I'll just kind of end things, I'll take questions right now, and then I'll while we're waiting, I'm happy to kind of show you what this whole presentation looks like.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ted. You did a great job. Yeah, great presentation. So please don't hesitate to leave your question in the chat. We still have time.
Yep. So this, yeah, I'm always happy to talk. So these are actually the slides. This is a repository for the slides. And this is the actual Quarto document. So this is I talked about that _Quarto.yml. So this is basically, this is kind of how you initialize your website. And then there is a index.qmd file here. So this contains my entire Quarto presentation. So if you dive into that, you can see that this is the front matter that I used. I used a, let me make this bigger again, sorry. I used a reveal.js format, and then I did some various, other front matter options. And this is what the slides look like. So you define a slide with two hashes, and then you can put in your bullet points. This is how you can do like formatting and everything like that. Oh, and thank you for sharing your Quarto website, Abhi. So there's, again, it's one of those things that it does take a little bit of time to learn and convert, but it's the learning curve is fairly gentle. And you can see, like, I have a bash code chunk here, but I'm not running it. So hopefully this is kind of helpful for you to help you get started with Reveal.js. It's really powerful. Okay.
Yeah, so I think you are done with the questions. Yeah, thank you so much again, Ted. So yeah, thank you, Hiba, for joining, and thank you all for joining us. I will make sure to share the recording video later on our YouTube channel, and I will let you know about it. As I told you earlier, don't hesitate to join us during our next meetup. So I will just share the link in the chat.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks again, Ted. And so have a nice evening or have a nice morning, wherever you are. Goodbye.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.